What is up, everybody? Damien here, and welcome to our fantasy life. Today, we're going to be reviewing The Princess Guide for Nintendo Switch by NIS America. And before we get started, I have to say to NIS America, thank you for sending over a digital retail copy of the game for this review. This is one I was going to buy anyway, so having them send over a copy was really, really cool. Really appreciate that. And I guess technically that makes this a sponsored video, so I just wanted to get that out of the way at the front. Another thing I want to mention at the start of the video here, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and then hit that notify bell, so if you love great Switch reviews like this, you know when these videos go live. But let's get started here, because I'm really excited to talk about this game. So the basic premise of the Princess Guide is kind of revealed right in the title. You play as a warrior who is undefeated in battle and is retiring from combat. And at the end of your last battle, your commander kind of suggests that you become an instructor. And as part of becoming that instructor, you choose a princess to teach how to defend her kingdom. Now, each of the princesses has a different storyline. I won't get too much into that here because it's this game is, like most NIS games, hundreds and hundreds of hours. So I'm just going to kind of give you the broad strokes here. But the first thing, before we get too far into the story and all that sort of stuff, the first thing that jumped out at me about the Princess Guide was the artwork, especially the UI. Oh, NIS America has such great artwork and user experience design. And what I mean by that is the menus are like everything feels like it's part of this world. The menus don't take you out of the game. The items don't take you out of the game. Everything is designed to have this kind of seamless look to it. So I really, really like that. The princesses themselves also have really, really cool designs. You know, graphical design is something that NIS does, I think, better than almost any other kind of JRPG company out there. And the Princess Guide does not disappoint in that aspect. Text pops off the screen. Every element feels like it's handcrafted. Now, one thing I did, the only thing I noticed is that the UI does seem like it was designed with Japanese text in mind. I don't know if this was a game that they were not like planning on bringing over to the US or something, but English text can sometimes feel kind of cramped, and the text in some menu boxes is kind of hard to see, but everything else seems really good. The only other thing I noticed is sometimes in missions, there'll be some text that like shows up on the ground as kind of this very stylized look when you complete an objective. That can get hard to read too, because sometimes it stretches off the screen, but everything else absolutely looks great, and that those text problems are kind of a minor trade-off for what I think are some very solid visuals. So if you love visual kind of smorgasbords, this is a great game to play. Even the title screen is gorgeous. Like the kind of the four princesses that you start off with are shown in this kind of color silhouette that really shows off their primary costume color. It's super well done. The whole visual design is super, super well done. Well done. Yeah. Overall, the design of the game is very appealing. Not just the visuals, but sort of every piece of the game feels very good. The only thing that I noticed at the start was that it's not really very much customization for your guide. Other than that, the aesthetics seem like they're very extremely detailed. Each princess has a really clear visual style. Their visual style seems to kind of clearly match up with their personalities. Each one has a very distinct kind of color feel to them. And those four princesses are Liliarte, the warrior princess, Veronica, the witch princess, Mona Maria, the rose princess, and Alpana, the dragon princess, which is the one that I started with. I started with the dragon princess. They're all different enough that there's definitely a princess for every personality. There's definitely a princess for every kind of player type. And they each kind of have their own cool storyline that you go through. Now, the one that you start with, obviously you're going to see more of that storyline, but eventually you do get all of the princesses in your party. That kind of brings me to another thing. The Japanese voice acting as you're playing through the game is awesome. I mean, I would like it if there was an option to turn on some English voice acting, but the Japanese voice actors did a phenomenal job, and the emoting is just so good in this game. They really get across kind of the feel to go along with the English text, because the game does have English subtitles. But it's super fun to hear the original Japanese, and like I said, the voice acting is just super top-notch, so I don't kind of mind it that much. Though the one thing I do want to call out here about the sound design, I highly recommend playing with headphones on. The sound in this game is stellar, even though the music is a little bit cliche, and I kind of noticed that most of the tracks aren't super memorable. Like I couldn't hum one to you after playing the game, but while you're playing, the sound design is just so good, especially in combat. I guess the word that I would use is satisfying. Like the sounds have kind of a weight and a feel to them that feels very satisfying while you're playing. In fact, I think the word satisfying is how I would describe most of the Princess Guide. It's satisfying. It's not super memorable. It's a good game. It's not a great game. It is a very satisfying experience while you're playing it. But and this is something I'm going to touch on again later in the review. It is a very drop-in, drop-out experience. You drop in, you play a couple missions, get a couple of cool new items, do your trainings, and then that's it. It almost feels like kind of a mobile-esque game, but just with deeper gameplay. But it is I do want to stress, it's a good game. I would recommend it for anybody that likes JRPGs and that is in that world. I don't know if I'd recommend it for a new player, and I'll explain more about why in a second here. Like most NIS games, the Princess Guide features really detailed anime-style artwork. So if you love fan service, and that's why I mention that specifically when I say anime style. If you love fan service, this is probably the game for you. There's, I'll call them jiggle physics. There's some animated jiggle physics that get a little crazy on some of the characters. For some reason, whenever your princess talks, actually whenever anybody in the game talks, their avatars kind of jiggle like there's no tomorrow. They kind of like twitch almost. They seem to go in like these little minor epileptic seizures. No offense or anything, but like every time there's a dialogue cutscene, the females are like just distractingly jiggly. So I don't know if that's kind of a thing. Some people might like that. I noticed that the Princess Mana Maria, she's got the least kind of jiggle to her, but the one that I picked, Alpana, it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. So if you like that kind of thing, definitely go with the Dragon Princess. Anyone who's played NIS games knows that they're kind of famous for being really menu and mechanics heavy. I almost say they're mechanics driven, and the Princess Guide is no different in that respect. The only problem with that is something that most NIS games kind of share that I've noticed, and that's you really have to love the game to get into it because it has a really deep lack of explanation for most of the game's most important mechanics. I kind of found myself in the early game alternating between mashing the attack button and using my princess's team, I guess they're called grunts, to just stun the tougher enemies and just attack them over and over again. That worked for probably the first third of the game, but then later on I started realizing I was dying, I was failing missions, and then I started having to kind of care about my gear and my strategies and things like that, the materia, the training, and I kind of had to go to the internet for most of that stuff. So I noticed while doing that this probably is not the best game for a first-time NIS player, because it does reward intuition, experimentation, and trial and error, which I think a new player may not understand going into it unless somebody's kind of warned them about it. So I found myself able to keep up with the quest objectives and the kind of depth of the system, but only because I had played games like Disgaea 5 Complete and Phantom Brave and things like that. I sort of knew what I was getting into, but a new player might kind of find that a little tricky, so that's something to watch out for. As a perfect example of this, the scold and praise mechanic is woefully underexplained. Like, it just doesn't tell you much about it at all, and even when you do find some explanations for it, even then it's still a little hard to grasp of what exactly it's doing. So I found myself for that one, I had to go on the internet, I had to get an explanation for it, and most other reviewers kind of came to the same conclusion that I did, so I was in the right headspace there. It's best used as a free heal for your princess in emergency situations. That's kind of what most people found to do with it, because one thing that the game mentions is that praising or scolding your princess at the right time, quote unquote, can give better effects. But I'm like 20 hours into the game, maybe somewhere around there, and I still have yet to figure out what the best time is, or if there's some kind of indicator on the screen that I'm just missing every time. I never know what the praise or scold is actually going to do. Now that could be me just kind of failing at understanding the game, but it seems like the game just doesn't do a good job of explaining itself, and you do sort of have to rely on strategy guides and things like that, it feels like there's just a ton of different things going on that never really mesh up, and that's the only sort of criticism I would have for this game, is that it does really rely on outside sources for you to understand the game fully. One quick example: your chosen princess has 5 stats: strength, wisdom, spirit, moral, and faith. And the first 3 are kind of understandable, I guess. You would think like maybe strength affects damage, wisdom affects like your magic, spirit affects how much, maybe how many times you can attack. But they're never really explained, and never really kind of shows you exactly what, let's say, maybe 1 point in strength actually does to your damage output or things like that. I just couldn't find that stuff anywhere. Even the guide on NIS's website doesn't really clarify things. The explanations are very vague. They sort of just tell you like, okay, well, strength, will help your princess get stronger. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't really help much. Like most NIS games, the expectation there seems to be that you will learn the deeper mechanics through experimentation rather than a good tutorial or a good introduction to the game. It's very trial and error based. But unlike a Disgaea game, I found myself kind of forcing myself to go back and learn all these mechanics rather than like being excited about learning the new things and trying experimentation and what crazy combinations I could come up with. It just didn't have that same excitement for this game as I've found on previous like Disgaea games and stuff. And I couldn't identify why that is. I think maybe it is because the characters just aren't that memorable. They don't really resonate with me in that way. But I think for fans of this genre, they might be a lot more excited to keep going back and keep trying and keep experimenting. The other thing I noticed was that items aren't really explained that well. So for some reason, you can't use items during battle. So heals are really few and far between. There's these things on the map called relics that you can use your princess to kind of take over temporarily. Some of them heal you, some of them attack, some of them you have to activate them to attack. Those aren't really explained that well either. So again, it kind of goes back to that trial and error where you have to kind of figure out what each one does and then look for them later in the game. These were all things that I kind of stumbled across on my playthrough, so I can't imagine a new player coming into this and just trying to figure it out on their own. It'd be, it would be, let's say difficult. I would say it'd be very difficult. And then the materia system. That's another thing that sent me scrambling to the internet to figure things out. I don't know. I just never felt like I really had a full grasp of the game. Now, I'm still going to be continuing. So I did this review, but I'm still going to be continuing playing the game because I am enjoying it. I just never feel like I have a full grasp of exactly what I'm doing and why. So maybe it's one of those games that just sort of reveals itself the more hours you sink into it. But I never feel like I know if I'm doing something right or doing something wrong. Every time I win a battle, I feel like I was either way, way overpowered, or if I lose a battle, I feel like I was way, way underpowered, and I didn't feel like it had anything to do with my strategy. So I don't know. I think for most JRPG fans, for most, I would call this game like an action tactics game. That's the best way I can describe it. Is there is sort of an action RPG element to it, but there's also a tactical element to it. And if you don't mind, if you're like a JRPG fan that doesn't mind having a strategy guide on hand, having a couple of internet tabs open while you're playing, then I think this game will be right up your alley. Now, the one thing I noticed that differs from other NIS games about this game is that, I would call Disgaea and Labyrinth of Refrain and Phantom Brave, I would call those kind of menu-driven games, and I would call them complex. The Princess Guide, it never seems to get to that same level of complexity as, like, let's say a Disgaea 5, right? Disgaea 5 Complete is my go-to reference for NIS because most people pick that up for the Switch. When I say complex, that's what I'm talking about, is like Disgaea 5 levels of complexity. The Princess Guide doesn't really ever get there. There are some little mini games. There's some training that you do with your princesses. There's some research that you have to do, but it never gets to the level of like a Disgaea game, which is a good thing, definitely. I feel like it might be a great entry point for people who are interested in NIS games, but don't want to necessarily spend hundreds and hundreds of hours on a Disgaea game. This would be a good entry point for them, as long as somebody has explained to them sort of what NIS is all about and how it's menu driven and trial and error and all those sorts of things. If somebody primes them for that, then I think this is a great game for them. If somebody goes into it blind, I don't know how you would figure this game out. it's that sort of it's that type of game. It's NIS games are kind of in their own little genre that's really hard to get across. If you've played one, you know what I mean. If you haven't, I would definitely recommend playing one. I don't know if I would start with the Princess Guide, but I would definitely recommend picking up an NIS game if you're at all interested in JRPGs. One advantage of the Switch is that you can take it with you in handheld mode, and surprisingly, the battles in the Princess Guide actually lend themselves really well to that pick up and go style of play, where if you've got 15 minutes on a break, or if you're on the train, or you're waiting around for some friends to show up or something like that, you can drop into a game, get a couple of battles in, and then pop back out, and you've had a full play session. So the more than most NIS games, the Princess Guide really lends itself well to the mobile experience. And then the other thing I noticed, it looks great, whether it's in docked or portable mode. Doesn't really seem to make a difference. It looks phenomenal. The only thing I would recommend is, like I mentioned in the start of the video, if you're playing in portable mode, I definitely recommend getting some headphones. Even if they're just some cheapy kind of over-the-ear headphones, some Sonys or something like that, I would recommend getting a pair of cheap headphones and popping them in, because the audio experience does enhance the visual experience in this game by, well, I don't want to give it a number, but it definitely enhances the experience. So all in all, to just recap the review here, while this probably wouldn't be the first NIS game that I'd recommend to a completely fresh newcomer to NIS style games, if you like NIS games and you can forgive kind of some of those little mechanical faults, I feel like the storyline is engaging enough and the button mashing is fun enough. So that's one thing I didn't really touch on the review. The button mashing part, like once you get into combat, the button mashing is super fun. It's just so satisfying. And it's got this manic pace to it that really kind of sets it apart from the other more tactical NIS games, where you're planning out your moves ahead of time. It's very tactical, where this game is just kind of run in and start mashing those buttons, which actually is a nice change of pace for a game like this. So yeah, if that's the kind of game that you're looking for, I would definitely recommend it. I would say for $40, I would say most people should pick this game up and give it a try. Because of that drop in and drop out gameplay, I would say just having it digital on your Switch would be kind of a cool change of pace. If you have some nice AAA games, maybe you're playing Assassin's Creed or something like that, you've got these really, really deep AAA experiences, and then as kind of a palate cleanser, you could drop into Princess Guide, work on your princess a little bit, and then drop back out. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this game if you're a fan of JRPGs, if you like tactical gameplay, if you like action RPGs, definitely pick this one up. So thank you guys for coming along on this review. This was kind of my first solo review here, so I appreciate you guys taking a look here while I show you my gameplay. Just another reminder, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, hit that notify button, and if you liked what you saw here, hit that like button. It really helps out our channel. And then to help us out, let us know what you thought down in the comments. Are you going to be picking up Princess Guide? Are you a fan of NIS style games? Let me know down in the comments and let's get a conversation going. Really, really like hearing from you folks. So until next time, I have been Damien. This has been Our Fantasy Life, and we will see you next time.